Welcome, everyone. It is wonderful to be here for our second session of Involuntary Simplicity, Spontaneous Evolution from the Inside Out with Steve Bhaerman and Bruce Lipton. Steve Bhaerman is an author, humorist, and political and cultural commentator who's been writing and performing enlightening comedy as Swami Bhayandananda for over 20 years. A pioneer in alternative education and holistic publications, Steve is active in transpartisan politics and the practical application of spontaneous evolution. He started an alternative high school in Washington, D.C., and co-authored a book about his experiences called No Particular Place to Go, Making of a Free High School. A political science major, he later taught history to auto workers at Wayne State University in Detroit as part of the Weekend College. In 1980, he co-founded Pathways magazine in Ann Arbor, Michigan, one of the first publications bringing together holistic health, personal growth, spirituality, and politics. Subsequent to Pathways, Steve was a freelance writer and co-author with Don McMillan of Friends and Lovers, How to Meet the People You Want to Meet. And he said in his talk last week that after he published that book is when he met his beloved and partner in life now, Trudy. Since 2005, he has written a political blog with a spiritual perspective, Notes from the Trail, hailed as an encouraging voice in the bewilderness. His latest book is co-authored with today's guest, Bruce Lipton, Spontaneous Evolution, Our Positive Future and a Way to Get from There to Here. Bruce Lipton is an internationally recognized authority in bridging science and spirit and a leading voice in new biology. A cell biologist by training, he taught at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and later performed pioneering studies at Stanford University. Author of The Biology of Belief, he has been a guest speaker on hundreds of TV and radio shows, as well as keynote presenter for national and international conferences, including the Prophets Conference. And it's now my pleasure to turn the microphone over to Steve. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Robin, and it's great to be here for the second session of Involuntary Simplicity, Spontaneous Evolution from the Inside Out. And my guest today is the individual who really essentially inspired this series through our collaboration on the book called Spontaneous Evolution. And these are very, very interesting times, we would say. They're very evolutionary times filled with crisis, filled with opportunity. And the purpose of this series is to identify the simple truths and ideas that will help us navigate these truly complex times. So I want to welcome you, Bruce. Hello there.
Hey, Steve. Thank you so very much. And I really want to thank you and Robin. And I want to thank our listeners and viewers out there, because this is indeed part of our evolutionary experiment. Just putting this together, I know there's technology, and Mike Pape back there behind all the controls, the wizard behind the curtain, is helping coordinate and run this. And we're all experiencing an evolutionary expansion of the nature of communication. So everyone on here is actually a cultural creative, because what we're doing is look how much greener this process is for you to be at home and participate in this than for all of us to fly someplace. So this is a necessary evolutionary stuff, and I'm so happy to be part of it. So thank Mike and Robin and you for that. Thank you.
Okay, well, right on the screen, those people who are looking at the screen, we see your book, The Biology of Belief, an award-winning book, over 150,000 copies sold in the first year and a half. It's really set a new standard for people looking at the relationship between our beliefs and our physiology and our lives. So for the people who aren't yet familiar with biology of belief, what are the simple ideas and principles behind the book that apply to our collective consciousness and the world in these times, Bruce?
Steve, this is such an important and very basic question we have to understand is the significance of what is the biology of belief all about. To go backwards into this understanding, then what I would have to say is that the biology of belief is a book of empowerment for us. And basically what it does is it's a book that shows us we are not the victims of our genes. And the significance about that is that our conventional education, and almost everybody out there has received the same education, is that genes control our lives and our traits, our characteristics, our behaviors, our emotions, etc. And why this really becomes relevant at some point is to recognize that as far as we know, we didn't pick the genes we came with, and we can't change the genes if we don't like the traits that we have. And what does that leave us as an understanding? It says that we are victims. We are victims of our heredity. If there's disease running in your family, then you're in the genetic lineage and you pretty much can expect to experience that in your life as well. Well, when we become victims, first of all, we look for rescuers, outside people who are going to help us because we can't help ourselves. So we turn over our lives to other people. And secondly, and very much more important, is the fact that when we see ourselves as victims, we become less responsible because it's like, well, I can't do anything about it, so why should I even try? And then we live with life without that responsibility. The biology of belief is based on research that I did years ago, and the significance of this research is that what it revealed was that whole story about genes controlling our life is totally false. Led us to the belief that is referred to as the central dogma. This is actually the name of it in the textbook, and it's actually a hypothesis that was provided by Francis Crick, and it was Crick, Watson and Crick that discovered the DNA double helix story. Francis Crick extended that story with a hypothesis called the central dogma, and I've illustrated like the Ten Commandments because, in fact, the central dogma is pretty much the foundational belief of modern biology and medicine. It's the belief that information flows in one way. It flows from DNA to RNA and then to protein. And you say, well, what does all that mean? I say, well, first of all, the living human body is a protein body. So we are the protein at the bottom of that tablet. And I say, okay, yeah, where did our protein come from? I say, well, you go back up and you say it came from the DNA. I go, okay, that's the story. The DNA controls the protein and the protein is us. As you notice, the arrows only go in one direction. If you understand that, then it says the protein, us, the body, cannot go backwards and alter the information of the DNA. Point is very clear and very profound. It says that you are an expression of your DNA, and yet in no way do you alter your DNA. So you are, by definition, a victim of your genes. And this is the belief we bought into, and it's the belief that genes control our lives, and then we look at our future as somewhat predetermined by the genes we received at birth. And yet, here's an interesting story, and it's based on stem cells. And this is work that I did 45 years ago with stem cells. And it's interesting for me because a lot of people think stem cells are something relatively new in our world. And the fact is, no, 45 years ago, I was cloning them. Just to give you an idea, what do I mean by stem cell? And stem cells are very interesting. Before you're born, there are embryonic cells in your body. Embryonic cells are multipotential cells that can become bone, muscle, skin, brain, whatever is needed. However, at the moment you're born, you still have those cells in you, a lot of them. We can't call them embryonic cells because now you're born. So we take the same embryonic cell from pre-birth and give it a new name, stem cell, after birth. So you want to call it a stem cell, you want to call it an embryonic cell, it's okay with me, they're multipotential cells. So here's what happened 45 years ago, and I love this because you don't have to be a molecular cellular biologist to understand the profound nature of the results. And here's what I did. I put one stem cell in a culture dish by itself. It divides every 10 or 12 hours. By the end of a week, I've got about 50,000 cells in the Petri dish, but then recognize one important fact. All the cells are from the same parent. That means I have 50,000 genetically identical cells in the Petri dish. Well, that's not the experiment. Here's the experiment. I take some of the cells out of that stem cell petri dish and put it into another petri dish where I change the environment. And when I mean change the environment for cells and culture is, cells are like fish. They have to live in an aquarium, and I provide the aquarium with all the things that cells need for their lives, so I make what is called culture medium. So I make one form of culture medium with certain chemicals in it, and I put the cells into that dish, and lo and behold, the cells form muscle. But then I go back to the very same stem cell dish, take more of the genetically identical cells, put them in a second petri dish with yet another environment, environment B, and the cells form bone. And then I go back and I say, wait, go back to the same dish, get some more of those same genetically identical cells out, put them in petri dish C, different environment, they form fat cells. Now here is the most important question you can ask about the research, and the answer is this: what controls the fate of the cells? Well, in all of our books, it says genes control the fate of the cells. And yet here's the simple reality. All the cells are genetically identical. So the different fates expressed by the cells are not programmed as fate in the genes. The fate of the cell is a reflection of the environment. And all of a sudden it says, oh my God, genes didn't control the development. It was the cell's interaction with the environment that controlled that development. Well, the relevance about that is, I take a petri dish of cells in my plastic petri dish right here. I take it from a good environment, put it into a bad environment, and the cells get sick. And then you might say, well, Bruce, your cells are sick. What medicine should I give them? And then here's the joke part. You don't give them any medicine. All you need to do is just take the cells out of the bad environment, move the dish back into the good environment, and the cells will automatically recover and become healthy again. The significance is this: the cell's fate reflects the environment. Now you're saying, well, great, Bruce, cells in plastic dishes, this is really cool. What does it have to do with me? I'm a human being. And I go, well, here's the interesting understanding. When you look at yourself in the mirror and see yourself as a single entity, that's actually a misperception. Because in truth, a human is really made out of about 50 trillion cells. And the significance is the cells are the living entity. So when I say the word Bruce, or you say the word Steve, you're talking about a community. I have like 50 trillion cells that I collectively call Bruce, and you have 50 trillion cells that you call Steve. And then you say, well, that's really cool. And I go, well, here's the important understanding. While we see ourselves as single entities, I said, no, we're communities of 50 trillion cells. What that really represents is this: a human being is a skin-covered petri dish with 50 trillion cells in it. And we have culture medium, growth medium, that influences the fate of the cells, and we call that blood. And so the significance is very important here. It says this: to a cell, does it matter to the cell if it's in a plastic petri dish or a skin-covered petri dish? And the answer is no. What matters to the cell is the growth medium, whether the one I created in the plastic dish or the blood in your body. And as I showed in the simple experiment, when you change the chemistry of the culture medium, you change the fate of the cells. And then we'll come down to the last step and goes like this: that in your human body, the culture medium is the blood. The blood is the growth medium, goes through your body and feeds 50 trillion cells. And I say, yeah, but if you change the chemical composition of the blood, you change the fate of the cells, whether it's in a plastic dish or a skin dish. And the answer is absolutely right. And then all of a sudden I say, well, what controls the chemistry of my blood? And then all of a sudden we start to find a very simple answer. Well, I'm a cell biologist. All of us are really what you would call self-biologists. We all create our own biology. How do we do it? The brain is the chemist. And as illustrated in this cartoon, the chemistry from the brain goes into the culture medium, which is in that flask. And the culture medium, called blood, is what is used to feed the cells, as illustrated in the cartoon, as the petri dish of cells. And so basically it says this: as you look at the world, your brain translates what you perceive into chemistry. And that chemistry controls your fate. And since the first thing we recognize is this: the fate of a cell is a complement to the environment, it then becomes simple and says, it's how you see the world that determines the fate of your cells. If you live in fear or something like that, you change the chemistry and actually inhibit the growth and maintenance of your body. So for example, I can just illustrate it simply. I say, let's say this is your brain, and you open your eyes and you see someone you love. And why is that important? And the answer is, when you love someone and you perceive it, the brain releases chemistry such as dopamine, oxytocin, vasopressin, growth hormone into the blood. These chemicals, when you add them to a petri dish of cells, causes the cells to grow exuberantly well. And this is a simple reason why when you fall in love, you feel so good, because the chemistry that comes from the brain in love is chemistry that gives energy and growth to your system. So we get a very positive aspect of love. But then I say, yeah, same person opens their eyes and they see something that they fear. And in that case, when they fear something, then what happens is instead of love, the fear manifests. And the fear puts different chemicals into the blood, stress hormones, inflammatory agents. So the same brain seeing fear shifts the chemistry in the blood. And if I put those chemicals from fear into a petri dish, it actually causes my cells to stop growing, and they will actually begin to die, because fear chemicals stop growth as we conserve energy for fight or flight. So here's the point. The cells in our body respond to their environment, which is the culture medium. Their environment is controlled by our perceptions of the world, how we see it. So when we live in love, we release chemistry that gives us health. When we live in fear or stress, we release chemistry that actually compromises our health. And now we see this is the mind-body connection. And this is why we see so much illness in the world mounting every day more and more and more, because it's a direct correlation with the amount of fear or the amount of stress the population is experiencing. So what it says is, we are creating our own health or our own disease just by the way we respond to the world. And that is the critical nature of why the evolution in front of us is so important. Because the evolution is this: I am not a victim of my genes. I am a master of the genes because I control them with the chemistry derived from my brain. And this chemistry is connected to my thoughts and my perceptions. So why am I a master? Because I am free to change my thoughts or my perceptions and beliefs and attitudes, and in so doing, I change my biology. And this is exactly what the concept of spontaneous remission is in a person who is, everyone believes is going to die, let's say, of a cancer, and everyone's sitting around for this person to die, and all of a sudden, they have a profound change of belief. They let go of their stresses, their fears. They figure, look, I'm going to die, so what do I care about all this stress? It's not relevant. Letting go of the stress changes the chemistry. The chemistry then goes from the blood to the cells, and the cancer cells are transformed back into normal cells again, spontaneously. And as you and I have put together, Steve, the Earth is a living system, and it's kind of sick right now. And the interesting part about it is, what does it take to turn it around? The answer is a spontaneous evolution. And so we're changing our beliefs, our perceptions of the world, and in that process of change, we are changing the health of the world as well. So we're on the edge of a spontaneous recovery from all the stresses and crises that are undermining the world as we know it.
Well, thank you, Bruce. And again, there is a simple idea, and the simple idea is that we are not victims of our biology. We are masters of our biology. And it may not be easy, but it's certainly simple that in choosing love or fear, putting ourselves in one of these two states, we can actually change our body chemistry. If we were to extrapolate this, we might say that as we increase love in the world, the body politic could become healthier. So I appreciate that simple idea.
It is simple, and that's the fun part about it, because when you think about it, almost all of us have been programmed with a belief about life, that if it's simple and easy, then it can't work, that life has to be something that's hard, and you have to sweat and do all this kind of stuff. And the interesting part about it is, it turns out biology reveals that life is as simple as this. It's just a matter of how you see it. And it's very fun because it replays so many people's opinions that have come through this civilization. The simple one is like Henry Ford. He said, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you can't, you're right. And why that becomes so relevant is simple. It's like it's your belief that will determine the chemistry, which will then control your behavior and your biology. If you believe you're going to get sick, you're going to get sick. If you believe you're going to get well, you're going to get well. And it really has to come down to the belief. But then we have to understand that belief is interfered with by programming.
Yeah.
So
And,
it's not,
yeah.
our lives are not just our beliefs. Our lives are our beliefs integrated with our programming.
Now we're at a time where perhaps that programming might be changing. We are learning more, becoming more aware. And, not only have you studied cellular biology, you've also studied evolution over time. And what are some of the simple gleanings about the process of evolution that apply to our situation right now?
Well, the interesting understanding would be for us to go back and recognize that that we can change our programming basis on our mind. And I say it, but the mind has two parts. There's a conscious and a subconscious part. The conscious part is right in the forebrain, right in the very front behind your temple is an extrusion of the brain, relatively new, called the prefrontal cortex, and that is the seat of our consciousness. The rest of the brain was there before that evolution of the prefrontal cortex, so the rest of the brain, by definition, represents the subconscious mind. But these are two profoundly different minds, and to understand how we're going to get from here to the survivable future, we must understand the nature of these two minds. And it basically goes like this, that the conscious mind is the one with our identity, our source, our spirit. That's who we are. It's also, very interestingly enough, the conscious mind is also our creative mind, okay? And so that's where the creativity comes from. And I said, well, what's in our creative mind? It's like our wishes, our desires, and our aspirations. So if I ask you, Steve, or any of the listeners on the line, I say, tell me what you want out of life. By definition, the answer comes from what is called the conscious mind, which has the creative ability to see into a future and what you want. That creative mind, which is connected to your spirit, has your wishes, your desires, your aspirations. It's also the center of positive thinking. In contrast, the subconscious mind is more like a record playback mechanism, like a tape player. You have life experiences. When you repeat them, the subconscious mind will learn them, repeat them, and then it becomes a tape where you can just like push the button and play the behavior again. So the subconscious mind is not a very creative mind. It's primarily habitual. It's got habits. And I said, where do the habits come from? Well, they come from our instincts and our life experiences, and also from our acquired programs. And what I mean by that is this. I can acquire an understanding of life without having directly experienced something. I have teachers. A teacher tells me about something. A teacher says that the desert is inhospitable. You can't live there. It's too hot. Nothing grows there. You can't find water. You're going to die there. Do I have to actually go to the desert to know that, or can I just learn that? And the answer is I can learn that. I can learn how to be a bigot. I can have a teacher tell me that these people are evil and bad and they're going to try and take your life and all that. And it's like, well, I've never even met one of those people. Yet if I get it from a teacher, I will download in my subconscious that if I ever do meet one of these people, I know they're the villains. So basically, the significance of the subconscious mind includes our own personal life experiences, but it also includes all the learning that we acquire from other people, our family, our parents, our community, our culture. That's all in there. Well, the relevance about all that is the conscious mind is a very small mind, function-wise, as the screen reveals. The conscious mind can process about 40 nerve impulses per second, meaning you can do a number of tasks with your conscious mind, but it's very limited. In contrast, the subconscious mind can process 40 million nerve impulses per second, and this is why the subconscious mind controls almost all of our functions, because it's a powerhouse of a computer. Now, here's the issue. The conscious mind has your wishes and desires on it, and the subconscious mind turns out to have programs mainly from other people. And what neuroscientists have revealed in the cover of this U.S. News and World Report magazine is that it's the unconscious mind that really shapes our decisions. And you go, well, why is that important? And I go, well, according to these neuroscientists, we're only conscious, meaning we are using our creative wishes, desires, and aspirations about 5% of the time in making decisions during the day. 95% of our behavior is controlled from the subconscious mind. Well, the problem with that is that the subconscious mind, the main programs in the subconscious mind are not even ours. We downloaded them as children. So I said, well, what controls your life? Well, 5% of your life are controlled by your wishes and desires. Peace, love, health, happiness, great job, great. 95% of our life actually comes from the programs we learned in our family and our culture and our community. Those kind of programs, which psychologists tell us 70% of those programs are negative and redundant and disempowering, self-sabotaging, limiting. I say, what kind of subconscious programs? The kind that we hear as kids. You don't deserve that. Who do you think you are? You're not that smart. You're not that lovable. You're not that able to do this or that. Those are the programs that go in the subconscious mind. And when we start to understand that, we realize that we are only contributing a very small amount with our wishes and desires and where we want to go, but we're replaying programs that have passed down through families and culture over and over again. And these are the limiting programs that are interfering with our lives, okay? So we know that the civilization is about to end and a new one is about to begin for this very simple reason. The beliefs which shape the current civilization and the culture, the scientific beliefs that created the patterns in our world, there are 4 fundamental beliefs that are now found to be totally false. And you say, well, why is that important? And the answer is simple. If we use the scientific beliefs to operate our lives in the world and try to operate it according to science, and we're operating from beliefs that are not accurate, then by definition, we're going to experience the crises that we're experiencing in the world today, the non-sustainability, meaning we are living patterns of culture that are self-destructive, and that these patterns are not accidental. They're based on our belief about how life works. So when beliefs change, a civilization changes, an old one ends, and a new civilization with new belief begins to take over. This is not the first time in Western civilization that this has happened. I mean, we go over the history of civilization, and we can see that there were cultures here, civilizations that have come and gone since we're here. We could go back to animism, like the Native Americans. Then we went into a polytheism period, like the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans. They faded away. The end of the Roman Empire faded away as Judeo-Christian monotheism, where the church-ran civilization started to take over the beliefs and then shape that civilization. And yet that monotheistic civilization really came to an end when new beliefs were introduced by the new truth providers called science. So we bought new beliefs from science, and these beliefs are the ones that we are operating our culture on today. Well, as we can see, and the proof is in the pudding, if we keep operating from the beliefs that we bought, we keep going deeper and deeper toward our own extinction. And it's a very simple fact. The beliefs we've been living with are flawed or outright wrong, and creating a culture based on those beliefs is so detrimental that it is now life-threatening. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah. Well, here we are. I mean, we're certainly at a simple choice point. Obviously, if what we've been doing hasn't been working, how can we go back to see what the patterns of evolution tell us about how we can go ahead and where we might be headed if we actually set a different course?
Yeah, well, here's the interesting part. A civilization is a living organism, and like a living organism has a life cycle to it, okay? So if I look at the life cycle of a child or a civilization, it'll have the same plan. That is, there's a period where it's born or created, followed by a period of development. And the period of development is the period that, right after the individual is born, this period of development is like a child going through, let me try this and let me try that and let me experiment with life. Let's go behind the barn and do something that my parents said we shouldn't do. We're going to try all these things. But as you grow up and you start to get mature, we enter into a period of rigidity, the flatline part of the curve. And the significance about rigidity is simply this. These are the beliefs. This is the way life is. And these are steadfast rules. And this is different than a child, which is trying everything. This is why there's a conflict between parents and child. Parents have rigid beliefs, this is the way life is, and we must follow these paths. And a child is like, yeah, right, let me try something different, so there's a conflict there. But there's a problem with rigidity and belief, and that is this. We live in a world that is dynamic and continuously changing. How can anything be rigid in a dynamic universe? The answer is, when we hold rigid beliefs, we create challenges because the rigid beliefs don't conform to the world that's changing in front of us. The challenges, when they're not met, lead to a decline of that civilization. And the decline of civilization is what we're in right now, because the challenges of the way we are living, we're experiencing them as all the crises that we see in the headlines every day. All the crises are the result of living a way of life that doesn't conform to the universe. And so the universe is telling us, maybe you better get some new ideas pretty soon. And the significance is, just because one life cycle is ending, it doesn't mean the end of everything. Because when one life cycle is ending, a new one is beginning. And that means that the people that are in our civilization, some of them are adherent to the old way of life and are rigidly following it down as it goes down toward extinction. And yet, so many of us, and the people that are on this teleseminar are among them, are called creative minorities or cultural creatives. And the significance of cultural creatives is that cultural creatives are the people who are like the young people in a civilization that are saying, let's look at some new beliefs. Let's look at a new way of life. Let's try it differently. So everybody on this line is really tuned in for a level of saying, I know it's not working. What is a better, more sustainable way of life? So all of us are looking for that. And it's really cool, because as we start to find the answers, we begin to shape a new civilization. In fact, this is what we found. What is it that shapes a civilization? And Steve, you and I put this together in spontaneous evolution, and it makes so much sense that we have to stop and pay attention to it. And I say, we have all these civilizations that have come and gone. What is it that gives a shape or character to a civilization, and what is it that causes it to end? And the answer is very simple, because it's actually based on the answers to three perennial questions. These are questions that have been asked since the beginning of human civilization. Same questions, 10,000 or more years. The question is this. Number one, how did we get here? Number two, why are we here? And number three, now that we're here, how do we make the best of it? Now here's the beautiful part that we tried to present in our book, Steve, and that is, however we answer the question, the answers to the questions, by definition, shape the character of the culture. We build a culture based on the answers. Number two, whoever provides us with the answers also becomes the truth provider for the civilization. Meaning, okay, we bought the answers to these three questions, and if we bought them from this organization or group, then we will also go back to the same organization or group for any of the other questions about life, because they become our truth provider. So a civilization is shaped by these perennial questions, which are collectively referred to as the Basal Paradigm. And the significance about that is that the Basal Paradigm answers shape the civilization, but then when the answers change, and this is the part that we all have to wake up to, when the answers to the questions change, we end the previous civilization based on the old answers and manifest a new civilization based on the new beliefs of the new answers. We leave behind the old truth providers and adopt new truth providers, and that's when one civilization is ending and another civilization is about to begin. So what we really start to do is we start to recognize that we are really changing the civilization that we're living in. And that what we can begin to find is this. The previous civilization, just so people understand what I'm talking about, is called Monotheism. The church ran the world. I say, how did we answer the questions? Well, the first answer, how did we get here? Divine intervention. Why are we here? To live out plays of morality on planet Earth to see if we're worthy enough to go to that next place, heaven, or wherever the spirits are. So we're here as a test. And how do you make the best of it? We live by the laws of the Bible. It was during this period of civilization that when we wanted answers to questions, we went to the guy wearing the black frock, the priest. But after Charles Darwin in 1860, new beliefs entered culture and they changed the answers because now we got our answers to the questions from science. So the new civilization after monotheism, scientific materialism, is based on answers to the questions that were different. So the first answer, how did we get here? Random mutations, the Darwinian theory. You say, then why are we here? Well, there's a problem. If we got here by accidental mutations, and by definition, there isn't no reason for us to be here. And yet the third answer becomes very fundamental because it shapes the world we live in. It says, how do you make the best of it? And the answer is live by the laws of the jungle. Meaning this, according to the Darwinian theory, life is a struggle for existence. So a culture recognizes that life is not easy, it's a struggle. How do you survive in a struggle for civilization? And the answer is you compete. And I said, well, how do you know if you win? And the answer is, if you're the last one standing in the competition, you win. So we have a world out there that's based on a struggle for survival and predicated on a competition for fitness. And so we built the whole world. And I said, well, what would be a consequence of this belief? And I said, well, there are millions of people starving in Africa right now, and there are people in this country with billions and billions of dollars. And the question is, does that seem right? Is there a moral context to this? And the answer is, well, science doesn't get into morality. Science just says the end is whoever is left standing in the competition. So according to the world we live in today, it says I can justify having billions of dollars while millions of people are starving because, hey, that's Darwinian, man. That's the law of the jungle. I'm the baddest guy. I win, you lose. And we accept this, except the answers to these questions have changed. And when we bought the answers to these questions, where did we go to get our truth? How do we know if something's true in our world today? And the answer is, we go to the truth provider. I say, who's that? The guy in the white coat, the scientist. So all of a sudden we went from the people in the black coat, the priests, to getting truth from the guys in the white coat, the scientists. And what's really relevant about that is the answers they have provided are now leading to our own extinction. People are pulling out of the system. And as they pull out of the system, we're preparing to create a new civilization based on new beliefs that transcend this scientific materialism. And then I say, and this is the leading question you asked me about 2 days ago. The question is, what's happening? And I say, look, as I said, the answers to the questions changed. And when the answers to the questions change, we have to create a new civilization with new answers. And this statement people have heard over and over again, but I like to show it because this is the context where Einstein's quote is so important. We can't solve problems by using the same thinking we used when we created them. And why do I bring that up? Is because the problems, the crises that we face in the world, climate change, peak fuel, economic disaster, social unrest, on and on and on, all of them are the result of the thinking that we've been using. So basically it says, you want to get out of these crises? You've got to change the thinking. Well, here's the fun part. Remember, when the answers to the fundamental questions change, they change the civilization. Well, guess what? The facts are in. The answers that we bought for the civilization that we live in are now modified. There are four of these fundamental beliefs that have changed, and you and I, Steve, put them in the book, and I love the joke that we refer to them as myth perceptions. So people think I'm lisping. I have a lisp, but no, it's a myth perception, which means this. We bought a belief to be true, built a life around it, and then find out that this belief is not true at all. And in fact, by continuing to follow this belief, we're going to our own end. So the four of them are simple. Number one, biological processes employ Newtonian physics. Simple point about that is, this is a belief that the physical mechanical world is all that really is, the primary world. Ignore the invisible stuff. You live in a material world. How do you know if you're doing well? The question is, how much material do you have in a material world? And we're doing so well that most people have so much material. This is the joke to me. We have so much material, we have to rent spaces in storehouses to store our material. And so the point is, where the heck did all this material come from? And the answer is, we pillaged Mother Earth. So guess what? We're running out of that stuff. And it's fortunate because this belief is no longer valid because the new belief is quantum physics. And quantum physics is not the emphasis on the material world. Quantum physics is the emphasis on the energetic world, the invisible world. So rather than being so materialistic, the new science is saying you're looking at the wrong power. You should be looking at the invisible, the spiritual, the energetic world, because this is what shapes our universe, not the physical world. So moving from Newtonian physics to quantum physics changes the way we respond to the planet in which we live and de-emphasizes materiality. It says maybe things like love and happiness and joy and health are far better than having a Humvee or a Maserati because they can't provide that. And the things I just mentioned, health and joy and love and all that, not tangible. It's really based on energy. The second misperception that is altering life on this planet negatively, and that is the concept that education is still teaching, genes control biology, which, as we started off with, is the belief that I'm a victim of my genes and therefore I have no control over my life. And as we talked about, there's a new science called epigenetics, and it's very important. Epi means above. So when I say genetic control, I'm saying control above the genes. Excuse me, I say epigenetic control. Let's go back. Sorry. Clear. Genetic control simply means control by genes. That's the current belief. Epigenetic control is changed because epi, the prefix, means above. So when I say epigenetic control, literally control above the genes, the new science is a science of how our mind, our beliefs, and our attitudes actually shape and can rewrite the expression of our genes. So we are masters because we can change our beliefs and attitudes and emotions and change our genes. The misperception number 3 is the Darwinian belief that evolution is based on the survival of the fittest. And the problem with that belief is that it leads to competition, and competition inevitably leads to violence, and violence leads to war. And so we see our world as a struggle for existence, a battleground of evolution based on this belief. And it turns out, again, this is totally wrong because it's actually survival of the fittingest, meaning this: nature encourages and enhances the life of any organism that supports the community, and nature will do its best to eliminate any form of life that influences negatively the harmony in the garden. And so all of a sudden it says, we're not here as we thought in a world of competition for our survival, which has led to the struggles we see in this world. Because the new science reveals that evolution is based on cooperation, that a garden is not a battle zone. By definition, a garden is an interactive, cooperative community. So why don't we have the garden anymore? Because we turned it into a battleground with our belief of competition. We must turn this around and start nurturing the garden, and in turn that will nurture ourselves. And the last of the beliefs that has just changed, which also changes civilization, is that we have bought into the belief that evolution is a random process because it's initiated by random mutations, and this turns out to be false. Evolution turns out to be an adaptive process, meaning this: every organism that is introduced into nature, nature introduced that organism specifically to bring harmony and balance to the world. So if one organism gets out of balance, nature brings in another organism to return the balance again. And each organism, as you go higher up the evolutionary scale, is more powerful in maintaining or controlling that balance than a lower one. And that's why we're in a problem. We're at nearly the top of that scale of power and control over the environment without the awareness. Our job was to create harmony and balance. And so using that power without that knowledge, that same power is causing us to destroy the environment, destroy ourselves, and bring us to the brink of extinction. So this is the message of how the beliefs have changed. And when a culture adapts to new beliefs, then the whole culture changes. And we're on the edge of closing out a destructive civilization and hopefully building the civilization that will take us from survival into thrival, into the next level. So that's I think, our movement, and that's because the beliefs, again, they have changed, okay? So wrap it all up. False understanding. Evolution was a continuous unfolding process that started with simple things like bacteria, amoebas, then they got worms, more complicated, clams, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, that this is steady, progressive, upward evolution. And it turns out that's totally wrong, because the significance about that is that what it really reveals is that this part is wrong. And why is it wrong? Because we're looking at the wrong thing. And so here's a new insight to evolution, because it tells us how we got here, Steve, but also tells us where we're going. And it's based on a simple understanding. It goes like this. First, there are the creation of dispersed organisms like bacteria. The bacteria populate the world as a loose organization of bacteria, but then they start to come together and create simple colonies. Then these simple colonies differentiate or become integrated and actually turn into a new organism. The integrated community is a new organism. So let's review it. It says, for example, we started with bacteria for a couple of billion years. The bacteria started to come together into communities called bacterial film with a membrane around them. So there's a large number of bacteria living underneath a membrane and sharing their world together. But if you further evolve that and integrate that, the bacterial film turns into what we call the amoeba. So the amoeba, by definition, is actually an evolved community of bacteria, but it's a new organism. So then we start again. For the next billion years, then there were bacteria, and now these amoeba-like organisms, they were spread out, dispersed all over the place, but then they too started to come together in a community. And then they became advanced integrated communities. An example is a human, as we talked about. A human is 50 trillion cells in one organism. Well, are you going to call me a community of cells, or are you going to call me a human? They're both the same thing. The human is the new organism. The community of cells is the integrated community of those amoebas. So then we start the process again. And the next jump is, okay, the human is now the dispersed organism. And early in human history, humans were dispersed all over the place. Then they started to come together in family units, tribe units, forming states, countries, and nations. And what we've seen is a progressive coming together of the individuals forming colonies which are differentiating, and the net end conclusion of this step of evolution is when all the humans recognize their integrated community as one super organism called humanity. So the evolution of the human, that already occurred a few 100,000 years ago. It's not the evolution of the unit of the individual human, it's the evolution of the community of humans. And that is, we are facing our survival based on whether the people all around the world recognize that all people are part of one organism called humanity. And if we don't do that, then the disruption between the humans is sort of equivalent to a human body, 50 trillion cells, where the cells fight each other. And we call that autoimmune disease, self-destruction. Well, if I was taking the pulse of humanity at this moment, I would say, wow, we're on the brink of making it or not making it. We're in a state of autoimmune disease. We're killing each other. And the question is, well, what's health based on in evolution? The answer is when the community finally owns the reality that all of us are cells in the body of a single organism called humanity. And this is what the wake-up call of the world is facing right now. The borders are coming down. The barriers between people are coming down. It's kind of a rough situation because we're turning the Darwinian world of a competition into a world based on cooperation. And it's a birthing process. And what people have to recognize is this. Birth is also associated with tissue damage and blood loss. And the significance about it is we are going through an evolutionary process. We are birthing a new organism called humanity. In the birthing, there is some hurt. There is some blood loss. There are problems. And this is what we're seeing around the world in the chaos right now, with the intention of, when we understand the destination, we all come together and work as recognizing that every human on this planet is equally valuable as a cell in the same body. And that is our evolutionary opportunity. And if we make it, we survive. If we don't get that together, the writing is on the wall. Enjoy the last few days.
You know, Bruce, really what you're saying in all three parts of your presentation, you're really saying the same thing. First of all, in terms of our internal biology, whether we focus on love and whether we bring together the things that create more harmony, that creates one kind of biochemistry. If we bring together the things that create disharmony, that brings together a different kind of biochemistry.
Absolutely.
And so as we focus on the world that's ending, the scientific materialism, survival of the fittest, it's every individual for themselves. In order to make it to this next threshold, essentially we have to recognize that we're all in this together, and that in increasing the power of love, connection, and harmony, which are really the principles of evolution. In evolution, every phase of evolution involves increase of the community, expanding the community one more level. And what we seem to be experiencing right now in this polarization in our body politic and in the upsurge of fear is the last bit of holding on to this system of it's either me or you.
Yes. This is the interesting part, and the fact is there's a pattern that's playing itself out, and if you see the pattern, then you know, because pattern is what's fundamental to science. If you don't have pattern, you can't have predictability, and when you can't be predicting of something, then we have no scientific awareness of it. So when you see a pattern, it's like, oh, great, you can see what is a potential. And as illustrated on the screen right now, we can see over time from 10,000 years ago to the current time that there's been changes in civilization. We talked about animism, the Native Americans, and here's what the chart really reveals. Through our evolution of civilization, we tried to investigate the nature of the spiritual world, and we tried to investigate the nature of the material world. And at different times, civilization was more spiritual, and at different times they were more material. So if we look back, we go back 10,000 years ago, we could see that animists, the Native Americans, everything that was spiritual was also material, and vice versa. So that if you wanted to hunt for the deer, you better pray for the deer spirit to coordinate that particular hunt. Every drop of water was also spiritual. Every leaf was spiritual. Every person was spiritual. That's animism. But there was a change where spirit started to be pulled out of things and coalesced into gods, and that became what's called polytheism. So we had the Greeks, the Romans, Egyptians. They took the spirit, let's say, out of all the individual raindrops, but made a god of water. So polytheism was an extraction of spirit from all the material things and then a coalescence into gods. And then it became all unified in monotheism, where all of the spirits, which once were involved with every living thing or everything out in the world, then became one God, one spirit, and not even on this planet. That was monotheism. So at that point, the world was totally immersed into the nature of spiritual life, and actually the physical world was banned. I mean, the church would say that your involvement with the planet would keep you from your destination, which is heaven, and so the earth is a distraction, and that's why we're here, to live out these plays of morality, so to speak, okay? So we went from everything being spiritual and material to everything being, just the spiritual end being the most important, and then there was a return. When the church overstepped its bounds controlling knowledge, remember, knowledge is power, and the church claimed absolute knowledge, which is absolute power, it led to absolute corruption and led to the Reformation. The population started to come back more into the material realm with the Protestants than they were with the Catholics, for a simple reason. The Protestants are the one that said, hey, having material things isn't bad, because if God loves you, you will be gifted with material things. So all of a sudden, the material stuff wasn't as bad as it used to be under the church. The curve, as you see, comes back to the midline in a place called deism. And deism was when we experienced the world in the Age of Enlightenment. Jean Locke in England and Jean-Jacques Rousseau in France created a philosophy of a utopian world, which was the basis of enlightenment. And what was so interesting about it is, where did the philosophy come from? And the answer is amazing. Jean-Jacques Rousseau got his Enlightenment philosophy from studying Native American Indian tribes. And that's why when you look at where is deism, which is the spiritual pursuit of enlightenment, it's back on the midline because it was predicated on the beliefs of the Indians about Father Sky and Mother Earth. And it was so important in that balance because that was where the United States was founded. The founding fathers of the United States were deists. They were enlightened people who came here to live the life of the Indians. And they took that life of the Indians and shaped an American government out of it. Now, not completely. There, of course, is where the problem of American government came
They
from.
left out a little piece, just a small piece. Yeah.
Well, Steve, you know the whole story about that one. You know, it's just who'd they leave out, Steve? I'll ask you. Who'd they leave out of the government?
They left out the girls. They
Now,
left
the
out
girls. You can't have a party if you leave the girls out. You know.
They left out the council of grandmothers to actually counterbalance all of this male energy. And as the Swami would say, when you just have male energy in a country, you have a stagnation. So.
Yes. And now, folks, you can see how interesting it is to work with Steve as your co-writer.
but Bruce, there's one more thing that I want to get before we get to the Q&A session, and that is the other patterns of evolution, the evolution of the various forms of life on this planet. Yes. As they relate to fractally the evolution of our civilization. This is a really exciting idea.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Steve, because when we look at the understanding of the nature of that, we're going to see we're moving back in time. So the new evolution, the civilization in front of us will be a mixture of the American Indian, the deist, and today's belief, mixed with the advances of the world. And so that how we got here, we understand completely different. It wasn't an accident. We were created to be part of this system, that we're here to tend the garden at the same time, acquire awareness of how we can live in the garden without destroying it. And so basically, how do we make the best of it is that we're beginning to learn how to live in balance with nature and to create technology that allows us to live here without undermining the garden in the process. So that's where we're moving to. And to let people know, this is just the third book in the series will be out in May, called The Honeymoon Effect. And why is it important? It's very simply this, is I ask people 3 questions. I said, go back to a time you fell head over heels in love with somebody. And so when I ask the questions of when you were back in that time, I say, were you healthy? And almost everybody says exuberantly healthy. And as I showed, when you're in love, you release the chemistry in the body to create health. I asked, did they have energy? And most people laugh because they realized when they were experiencing what I call the honeymoon effect, that they made love for days in a row without stopping for food or sleep, so they surely had energy. But more importantly, I asked people when they fell in love, was life so beautiful you couldn't wait for the next day to have more? And the answer, of course. And I say, well, then essentially, what did you do? I say, you created heaven on earth. That was what the falling in love was all about. And I say, yeah, but think about this. It may have been the same crummy world you were in until the day you met this person. The day you meet this person, all of a sudden, now you have heaven on earth. Well, it's still the same crummy world, but now you have heaven. What's the difference? And this is why I wanted to bring it up, because what's so profound about it is, well, the honeymoon starts out as this beautiful, idyllic vision of, living on a Caribbean island. Inevitably, the honeymoon turns back into something less wonderful, such as this vision of a honeymoon hotel right here. And I said, well, what created the honeymoon? Why did it go away? And the answer is simple. I said there were 2 minds, a conscious mind with creative wishes and desires and aspirations, and a subconscious mind with programs primarily derived from others. As science is now revealed in this article, A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind, means this: when the conscious mind is not paying attention, not being present, then the subconscious kicks in as the default. And so what does it say? It says that, well, when you take your conscious control off, which has your wishes and desires, and your mind wanders, you kick into the default, you play other people's programs, those are the programs that create all the unhappiness. So the question is, how did you create heaven on earth? And the answer was, you let go of the old programs and pursued your wishes and desires and aspirations. It's the programs that are the limiting factor. And when we our minds get busy after that honeymoon and start to get busy and life kicks in and we start to to default to the subconscious is when the honeymoon ends, because that's when we start playing those negative behaviors that we got through our culture and our family. And so why is this important? And the main thing is this: I'm not saying that creating heaven on earth is a possible thing. And what I'm trying to say is most of us have already done it. Now, if we collectively did that, it means then everybody would be living the same heaven on earth. That is the destination. And what is the ultimate destination? The answer is we must disentangle ourselves from the programs of limitation that the current civilization has put upon us. And when we understand that, we start to recognize that when we're in love, that's when we operate from the conscious mind. So when we're all living in love, we're making our decisions, our behaviors, our activities, all based on wishes and desires and aspirations, and that's when we manifest the beautiful planet, okay? So to understand where we are right now in this story is basically this. We are playing out a pattern of evolution, that we know that the structure of nature is not random or accidental. It's built on a geometry, which is, by definition, geometry is the mathematics of putting structure into space. That the geometry that we all learned in school is called Euclidean geometry, but that doesn't represent nature. Of course, we build our buildings, we make our factories, create our machinery, all using Euclidean geometry, but Euclidean geometry doesn't make nature, a tree, a sky, mountains. That doesn't come from that geometry. It's a different geometry. It's called fractal geometry, a new geometry, very exciting for this reason. And here's the exciting part of fractal geometry. It uses a very simple equation and repeats it over and over again millions of times. And how do you do it? You get an equation, you solve it, you get the answer, put the answer back in the equation, solve it again, get another answer, take that answer, put it back in the same equation, solve it again, get another answer, and you repeat this over and over and over and over again millions of times. But here's the result that we need to understand, cutting through all the BS, which means belief system, cutting through all the BS of fractals is this. Because you use the same equation and repeat it over and over again, there's a characteristic of fractals that was understood by ancient mystics. And that is that the structures repeat themselves in a self-similar fashion at any level of the organization. So, for example, I talk about cells as miniature people because cells have the same functions as human, but they just look different. But there are different levels of organization. A small cell is like a miniature human. A large human is the equivalent of a cell. The fractal character emphasizes the mystical quote, as above, so below. It's not just a nice saying. It becomes a fundamental character of the geometry of the world we live in. So it says, if you see a pattern that occurred before, you can extrapolate that pattern to project onto the next higher level. So the bottom line, hopefully before we get to the questions, and I get there so we have time, is that human civilization, or a bunch of human cells coming together into one living animal organism called humanity. Therefore, the evolution of civilization, by definition, would be a pattern repeat of the evolution of animals. So that would mean, for example, just at the vertebrate level, there was a period of civilization that represented fish. There was a period of civilization that represented amphibians. A later civilization was more reptile-like, then a bird-like civilization, and then a mammal civilization. Where are we? The answer is simple. We'll go back to the fish-like civilization that was called mariculture. That was long, 10,000 years ago or more. People who lived here had to live by the water, like fish. They couldn't go inland because if you didn't have the water, you would die. So being restricted to the water is about like being fish. They traded across the seas. They harvested food from the ocean. The next level is amphibians. Well, amphibians were animals that took the water with them on the land. The amphibian phase of human civilization is agriculture. We're no longer restricted to the edge where the water was. We could go inland and cultivate the land and find the water, get the water, or at least have the water to keep life alive inland. The next phase of civilization, when we went from agriculture, we went to the reptilian phase, which is the industrial age. And the reason why that is, reptiles are machine-like animals compared to amphibians and fish. They were so perfectly designed to be machines on this land that they were able to grow into 50-foot giant monsters, dinosaurs, okay? But here's the part. The evolution of the reptiles started with small lizards, and then the lizards grew bigger and bigger and bigger and became giant dinosaurs. The industrial age started with small mom and pop manufacturing, neighborhood shops putting things together. But over time, those industries turned into the giant corporations, which are the dinosaurs. It's also interesting that the industrial age is fueled by oil, which is euphemistically referred to as the blood of the dinosaur. So the reptilian character is introduced by burning all the oil that we're doing, except the reptiles gave rise to something really interesting called the birds. I said, well, okay, when did the industrial age turn into the bird phase or aviation phase? The answer was 1903. That's when the Wright brothers flew with Kitty Hawk and started the evolution of the bird phase of civilization, which when the world started, before the plane, the world was so big we couldn't imagine it. And then once we started building planes and rockets, we could go around the world in minutes. It changed the whole perception. Aviation phase of civilization changed our relationship to each other and the world around us. And it led to the highest evolution of birds, 1969, when astronauts landed on the moon. That was the highest evolution of birds, but what did they do? They shot a picture of the Earth, sent it back. And in 1969, there were these young people on the planet called hippies, and they saw this picture of the Earth suspended in all that darkness, and it hit them in the head. They said, wait, that's all we have. We have to take care of this beautiful, delicate planet. Take care of the air, take care of the water, take care of the children. Taking care is another way of saying nurture. Nurture is the character of mammals. So in 1969, a new civilization was birthed by the picture from the evolution of the birds on the moon, was a mammalian civilization that says we must take care of the planet. Now I say, so where are we today? And I go back, oh, here's the fun part. When the mammals evolved, the dinosaurs were still in charge of the world. The mammals were the meek, the little furry guys that tried not to get stepped on by the dinosaurs. Well, guess what? The dinosaurs crashed, and the meek take over the earth. The mammals took over after the dinosaurs crashed. Where are we today? The industrial age dinosaur corporations are these monsters that are stepping all over us, and the people on this line, you, Steve, me, Robin, Mike back in the controls, we're all part of the mammalian generation. And what's going to happen? The answer is this. Well, we're being stepped on by the corporations right now. The corporations are in a state of failure. The oil is running out. The money is running out. And what will that mean? The failure of the corporations will mean the crash of the dinosaurs, and the mammals and the meek will take over. And who are the mammals and the meek? Well, the original hippies, and mainly their grandchildren. The grandchildren who constitute the millennial generation. The millennial generation, people under 40, they represent a complete generation that is separated from the reptilian society. The millennials have got education and bills, but no jobs. The millennials are out there saying, I can't get a foothold in this stupid civilization. And guess what? Now there's nearly 50% or more of the population are the millennials. You say, well, yeah, this is so great for this reason. You can only hold on to a structure in regard to how many people are holding on to it. We now have 50% of the population that have no holds on this current civilization. Go tell a millennial the stock market's going to crash, and they'll go, so what? I don't own a stock anyway. What does it mean? We are ripe. We are very ripe for a turnover in civilization at this point. There are fewer people holding on to the structure. There are more creative people out there, cultural creatives and millennials out there that are seeing a better world. So we are in the repeat of a pattern at the very time in history where the dinosaurs crash and the meek, or the millennials, start to take over this world. And that's why it's so exciting, because even the millennials don't even know how important their job is in this world when they find themselves at a loss for a job, or, how can I be involved? They don't realize that is one of the fundamental steps that will encourage the new civilization. So I'm very optimistic that when things fall, we're going to have a global civilization, which is one of the characteristics of the millennials. They're connected by the internet. They don't see borders and barriers as separation. They start to see, the millennials, that All people are part of the same living organism. Yes, this is the evolutionary vision that will carry us out of this reptilian phase and get us into the next and most advanced phase, the mammalian nurturing phase of human civilization. And before we take questions, I have to also admit this, Steve. It's still a toss-up. It doesn't mean we're going to make it. We're at the choice point. And what lies in front of us is, who knows? It could go any number of ways, but the two main ways are, as predicted by science, extinction, and as suggested by the millennial possibilities, an evolutionary jump taking us way beyond where we are right now. And it all depends, when it shakes out, how's the vote going to come out between the millennials and the baby boomers?
Well, interestingly, Bruce, part of that choice question, it's a this or that question. It's a question of where is it that we put our energy, where we put our focus, and maybe the question isn't, can we do it? Maybe the more intelligent and useful question is, how can we do it?
Yeah. Well, you should be able to answer that, because together we sweated that one out for a long time when we recognized the fractal character of civilization. It says, look, underneath your skin are 50 trillion miniature human beings called cells. They're miniature human beings because they have the same functions as we have. Cells have respiratory, digestive, excretory, nervous, and even immune systems. And they live together, 50 trillion of them. And when you look at a healthy human body, you're looking at a civilization of 50 trillion citizens that are learning to live in harmony, prosper, grow, and experience love on this planet. Well, boy, if there's a template we ever needed, is understanding the society of cells, because the wisdom of cells will be the necessary evolutionary requirement to jump from where we are to the next level.
And this is a useful reframe. So many people talk about this heaven on earth as being utopian, but to ourselves, it's health. That's what it is. It's health, coherence, harmony, and sanity. And as the Swami would say, there's no harm in harmony. So thank you, Brucey, for being with us today. And we do have some time left for questions. Bruce Lipton, the man who time cannot contain. You're beyond everything. So maybe we can extend just a little bit longer to get questions. I really so much. You can see why I love working with Bruce, and how provocative and how positive this message is. So I really so appreciate you being here, making this presentation, taking the time at a time when not many people have time. If only we had gone on the 8-day week, we'd have more time. So, so Robin, how about other questions?
We've got a couple of questions. The first one is about changing our programming based on the mind. You said illness is due to belief. And what about karma, either past life or present? Do you feel that karma is just an accumulation of beliefs?
Okay. Thank you, Robin. Thank you for whoever offered that question. Very interesting question. And the thing that we really have to understand is this, is that there is a genetic component to disease. So let's don't throw that out completely. But let me give you a fact about it. Less than 5% of the population arrived on this planet with altered genes that would impair them from having a healthy, harmonious, prosperous existence on this planet. So it says 95% of us got here with an adequate set of genes to fully live an experience of health and happiness here. Now the question is, in that 95%, if they start expressing an illness, what can we attribute it to? Well, the first thing is this, not the genes. They already got good genes. Then we start to recognize that's the nature of beliefs and perceptions. And as we talk about how does that work, and the answer is because your beliefs and your perceptions are turned into chemistry to match those beliefs and perceptions, and that chemistry goes in the blood and controls the fate of the cells. Then we have to bring up, okay, so as we get these beliefs, if the beliefs are in harmony with life, then as we pursue that, the chemistry of our body is in harmony with the world around us, and that's what we're trying to find. The nature of karma becomes very critical because before 1985, if you would have asked me about spirituality, I would have had grave doubts. I was teaching biology as genes and proteins and chemistry and machine here and then gone back to dust. After 1985, I started to understand the nature of how our identity is actually part of the field, the energy field in which we live, and it's downloaded through a set of antennas into the self, so that there is an awareness and identity that plays through what are called self receptors into ourselves, and each one of us is different. Well, the information just doesn't come from the spiritual world into the body. The relationship for having the body is very critical for this reason, because the body interprets the world and turns it into awareness that is sent back to the source. So it's a two-way street. So you come into the body, you have life experiences, and life experiences are translated into electromagnetic activity by the brain and sent back to the source. Well, what's the point is that when you come into this life and then experience it, you end up with a different awareness in your spiritual field than you started with. So every time, and you come back in again and again for a very simple reason, is because, as I said, there are a set of antennas on the surface of the cell that make each person unique, and that if a future embryo shows up with the same antennas that you have right now, you're back online in a different body with a different biology and a different life experience. So we come and go, but each time we come and enter into life, it's not a one-way street. Spirit just goes into the body. It's the experiences of our world go back into the spirit. So it says that spirit changes over time. And the significance about that is that these changes alter our spirituality and represent what we call karma, modifications to what our spirit is. And yet, really, what is the mission and drive? It's finally to return back to knowing who you really are. You are not the body. You are the spiritual entity. And when you start to understand that and start to understand the nature of the harmony that is being sought after in our evolution, then yes, the karma influences our lives, but we can change the karma in the same way we change our beliefs in our living world, and that is by really knowing who we really are. And once we own that, then we can let go of the history of the life experiences that led to the karma that we hold today, and change our world. So basically it says you don't have to live through X number of lives to get to the other side of understanding this. Is when you become aware, you become empowered. And that's what the world is beginning to face right now, is that we are more than molecular nuts and bolts. We are an entity of information, a spirit, a source, and our lives are a two-way street between those. So yes, karma influences our life, and yet our lives can go back and alter the karma, and that's an important message for all of us to learn.
I just want to add something about karma. If we look at the chart that's right on the screen right now, if you look at these various phases that humanity has gone through, each one has added to our knowledge, our understanding, and the depth of appreciation of life. So this is a cumulative wisdom. The other thing in regards to karma is that in a certain regard, love, forgiveness, etc., can actually trump karma. I think that's the distinction that the Judeo-Christian system overlaid on top of this cyclical repeating pattern. And Jesus' whole idea behind his work is that love is what dissolves all of these past situations, and the power of forgiveness that we can use to dissolve that takes that energy away. There's nothing else to rebalance. So perhaps that adds to the conversation.
It really does.
Great, thank you. We have another question or comment from Krista Ortman, and she does have a microphone.
Okay. Bruce and Steve and Swami and Robin, I would really like, I'm thanking you so much for this series of shows. And my particular question, which is really actually a comment, is that my understanding is that if I'm choosing to change my world, which means the beliefs that I'm holding, not only is it important to have that thought, but to visualize the changes in my world, and most importantly of all, to feel them. And I know, in a sense, Bruce, you spoke about love, and you spoke about fear and how they influence the chemical reactions in our brain and what happens. So it's a question comment, I guess.
Yeah. Chris, that's exactly what the whole idea is. And ancient mystics have also said the same thing. They also mention the fact that the kingdom of heaven lies within. And basically says, if you want to be in heaven, then you have to live as if you're in heaven. If you live as if heaven is going to come later, then that means you're not living the life that heaven is all about. You can only experience it if you live it that way. And so this has always been the hard part for people to get the understanding of that life on earth can become heaven. And actually, as I said, this is the fun part about the new book, is that I don't have to really push people into say, listen, can you believe that? Because I said, most people have already experienced that when they've fallen in love, that the world they were in is different the moment they start living that love experience. And then when they start realizing how heavenly it is, of course, that's the honeymoon that just takes the breath out of you. And in fact, is what? Well, it's the same world you're living in, but you are now living in it in a different way. You are not living according to the programs that were downloaded into us before age 7. You are living from a creative aspect of wishes and desires. And as soon as you did that, you manifested heaven. So heaven is already here. We just have to let go of the program.
Yeah, wonderful. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for the answer and for the clarification.
Thank you, Krista.
So much appreciated. Thanks. And I'm definitely working on creating heaven on earth here.
Yeah,
Great.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Why don't we go for heaven on earth just for the hell of it? So.
Great. Well, we have another question from Carol Strauss.
Ruth, remember me? I'm the attorney that came up and said, when was the last time you were hugged by an attorney? And hugged you. And I know Margaret from Forever. Hi, Steve. You know me too.
Of course I do.
Yes. I don't remember if I hugged you, but if I didn't, I apologize.
It was back at the Holistic Lawyers Conference.
Yeah. And so my question was, what if there really is a creator, and what if that creator is a force tipping things in the direction of not going extinct? And I'm all 3 Jewish by background, but as you can see, I too have attempted to evolve here.
Yeah, the fact is, as I said, I came from a totally non-spiritual, scientific kind of understanding of my life to this other understanding. Now, I see us as, here's what I see us as, is that if you take all that is, let's call it God, and break it up into smaller pieces, each one of us is a piece of that. So we are not disconnected from some creator. We are an expression of that creator. That the way I see it is each one of us is a cell in the body of that creator. So the nature of the world that we're involved with, I see is our participation as much as any creator's wishes and decisions, that there's an interaction between us and that creator. And from the standpoint of health, it basically comes down to this. It says that when we start to live in harmony, guess what? We become healthier. It's biology's way of telling us whether we're on the right track or the wrong track. All you have to do is look towards a reflection of your health, and your health is a reflection of your response to the environment. So basically, if I was saying, where's the direction we tend to go? And I say, well, according to my cells, the direction I want to go in is toward health and harmony. And so therefore, there's an underlying plan to take us to that destination. And that's what we're all trying to work on right now, is how do we get out of the sickness of this world and into the health and harmony of the potential world that lies in front of us. I don't think it's like we are marionettes and totally guided by the above, because the free choice comes in as, well, you can have all this knowledge and do stupid things and hurt yourself, but that's your choice. So I really see it as there's an underlying direction, and we're on a path, and it's our choice and our decision whether to stay on that path or veer from it.
I just found my video thing. Yes, I agree with that. I think we're agreeing.
Yes.
And I too come from the same, background of science and atheism and that whole bit. So, anyway, I wish I could hug you again, but I can't. I heard you first at ICEAM. Loved it. You talked much faster then because you had to squeeze everything into such a small time. I heard you twice at the plenary session and the breakout session, and that's why I came to Irvine, and then I fell in love with you, which is why I hugged you. So I'm on the team. I just wanted to throw that out as being, I think, in addition to everything you say, a factor that I think leads to hope. Call me Pollyanna, but that's where I'm at.
Me too.
Good. Okay, I still love you dearly. I'll let you go now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carol.
Love to see
Carol,
you soon.
I have one more comment on that. There is something called process theology, and this is a theology that developed after World War II, when not just Jewish theologians, but Christians as well were asking, if there is a loving God, how could that God have allowed something like the Holocaust? And this process theology says essentially that we human beings, so if we want to be able to bring that, if we want to manifest heaven on earth, or what we perceive as a loving creator on earth, we have met the Messiah, and he is us.
Yep. Yeah. And it's also interesting, Steve, to add this to the equation about like the Holocaust, to say how horrible that is. And then if you understand the possibility of how reincarnation occurs by the fact that our self-receptors are propagated onto another individual and that we're back again but in a different body, then look at life this way, like a film strip where you unroll the film strip and there's like so many frames per foot. And each frame represents a different life. And I say, look, we've had thousands of lives. What is it every now and then that you contribute a life to teaching the other lives? So a Holocaust was a collective group of souls and spirit that said, we are, part of a teaching thing. This one frame, out of the thousands of frames you're working on, this frame, you're a part of a Holocaust victim, okay? All of a sudden, when you start to realize maybe thousands of lives, then if you only have one life, that's a real bitch to end up in the Holocaust, But if you have thousands of lives and you've really got a lot of wonderful experiences on this planet, you donate a life for the group. You're contributing to the knowledge of the group, and you donate one life, then you have to look at it and go, well, out of 1,000 of them, that's tithing.
But do you imagine that there's like a job board, in between lifetimes? You get disembodiment insurance for like a period of time, and then you got to go get a gig, and you're looking on the board, and Jewish family in New Jersey. Then you look at the alternative. You go, I think I'll take that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I don't need to be a slumdog millionaire this time.
That's right. Yeah, you'd be a millionaire without the slumdog. Anything else? How are we doing? Are we?
I think that's really good. This has been so wonderful, really, really wonderful, and just I feel so inspired and actually filled with more hope.
I'm glad that's happening, Robin, because it's the hope that will get us through. Because when we give up, then we experience what we believe, and I'm not ready for that yet.
No.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that as we keep moving along in this direction, I think we are collectively living into our dreams, and the more energy we allow in this new world, the beliefs of the old will begin to unravel and dissolve, and they'll become less real.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Bruce, for being with us. I want to thank everyone who has been on this call and being part of this conversation. Again, people can go back and listen to this, so you can. and you can invite your friends to participate. Next week, our guest will be Michael Dowd, author of Thank God for Evolution, and taking the conversation further into how to unite the so-called scientific and the so-called spirit. And Bruce, I love you, and I'm glad you were with us today.
I love you, Brother Steve. And Robin, thank you so much. Thank all the people out there. And a special thanks to Mike Pape, who's back there, hopefully not pulling out his hair. And we're still here and at work. So thank you, Wizard Mike, for making all this come about. Thank you.
Not a problem, man. Not a problem.
There he is.
I pulled my hair out ages ago. That's why.
Yeah, it's a new growth that's popping up, ready to be pulled out next time.
That's the recycle pattern, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. There we go.